Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
In Puerto Rico, citizens by the tens of thousands are calling for the governor's resignation. With a population of 3.34 million, Puerto Rico has more people than 20 U.S. states, the District of Columbia, and all other U.S. territories. Who cares that these people are protesting, and what are they protesting? Well, they're protesting they're protesting to seek the resignation of their governor, Ricardo Rosselló, as there was a large swath of private communications released where he used very crude language to describe his political opponents and certain institutions in Puerto Rico, and that exposed what many allege is corruption, ongoing corruption inside the Puerto Rican government. So you care because these people, Puerto Ricans, are U.S. citizens. That's right. Just like our producer, just like Lance and I, they're U.S. citizens. But they're U.S. citizens, Caleb, who cannot vote for president and who do not have voting representation in Congress, which to me, Lance, sounds a little bit like taxation without representation.
Revolutionary War.
Sounds a little bit like that.
Sorry, I stole Lance's historic thunder. I'm sorry.
Your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, first, Justin stole my thunder because I was going to mention the fact that why you care is that Puerto Ricans are American citizens, because that's kind of been our theme since Hurricane Maria, that, we were trying to point out people, if this happened somewhere in the continental United States or in Alaska or Hawaii, we would be much more involved in this news story. And then I'm playing third chair today because our intern producer decided to talk before I got to talk. So, hey, I'm here, folks. If you get to hear from me again, it'll be a nice day. I hope you like what I have to say. If you don't, just know that I am in the studio, even though I've been demoted here for today's show. So we'll try to talk about Puerto Rico. And if I get a chance, I'll let you know my feelings on it. If I don't, just everybody have a great day. And we'll talk to you probably at the mid-show reads and let you know about Slack and maybe some, Stitcher and some Apple Podcasts. But other than that, it's been good knowing you today.
I just thought I'd show off the NHS knowledge that we're always referencing. Okay. That was my thought process. All right.
Some great knowledge. So we're referencing the Wall Street Journal from Wednesday, July 24th, and you can find the article if you'd like to read it for yourself at thestateofus.org. We've got the articles that we're referencing on today's show listed there.
Which I think is a new cool feature
that
we're doing. I really like that. I think that's one of the best things we've done in the last couple of years with the show.
Those and the badges are really awesome. The
badges.
The badges are cool.
The badges help. And we're referring to the listen badges there. So you can, you can use the website also to find all the places that Lance was mentioning to listen. You just tap on them and it opens it in your app on your phone. So the article explains that whoever succeeds him, referring to the current governor, will face challenges: the decade-long recession, crushing public debt, and rickety infrastructure. A new administration would have to restore credibility with the federal government, which controls funding the U.S. territory. And the problem is that public anger toward the governor isn't the only problem. It also has to do with anger toward the oversight boards that is managing the island's government finances and steering it through bankruptcy. While a galvanized public is demanding a harder line against the board, the federal law that created its constraints the territory's ability to challenge its actions. A U.S. House committee has tightened controls over Puerto Rico's access to $12 billion in Medicaid funds in response to the indictment of a health administrator on the island. Puerto Rico was expecting tens of billions of dollars in federal aid for repairs to infrastructure, but the scandals surrounding the governor have battered the territory's credibility. According to Miguel Sotaclass, president of the Center for a New Economy, a nonpartisan think tank in San Juan. Quote, while the governor is there, none of these funds are going to flow, end quote, he said, adding that a new governor would have to implement better transparency and accountability mechanisms.
So it gets to the point that there's not necessarily it's the leadership in Puerto Rico. There seems to be some deep-seated Tammany Hall-like issues within the government, that there's a lot of corruption that's going on in Puerto Rico. And no matter who the leader is, they're going to have a hard time. Changing the leader of Puerto Rico isn't going to fix the problems. There are a lot of deep-seated problems that are going to have to be looked at for the government to become more efficient in dealing with problems. And again, if this were happening in one of the 50 states, how much more coverage would this be getting? And would we be stepping in and seeing people do something about it? Instead, as we start to enter hurricane season for 2019, here we are with them still flailing around, and now the government not even having any support and some deep-seated problems there, it sounds like, that need to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, and that I think is the big thing that people don't realize is, I mean, it has been, so long now. I mean, it depends on the perspective, but it's been a while since Hurricane Maria, and they're still not in a position to be ready for the next hurricane. And then you've lost public trust in the government that's there, which makes it even harder because now Washington, even though they're not usually inclined to help very much or be very expedient ever, now they're even less inclined to do so because it's like, well, the people don't like the government, so we don't want the people to get mad at us then for appeasing the government. But the problem is it puts in jeopardy all of these people.
Well, and remember too, that
all 3.34 million of them.
And maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but after Hurricane Katrina, it almost brought down the Bush administration.
Right.
Because as negligible as FEMA was and everything else connected to it, and the slow reaction of the federal government to New Orleans, that was in the news constantly and people talking about it. And we had pictures and we had news reports and people on the deck, the patio of the Superdome. And we got stories, and how they're going hungry and the heat, and inside the crimes that were being committed inside on the Superdome floor because there were no police, nobody protecting anybody, and women and children being abused there. And what are we hearing about Puerto Rico 2 years later? And who's saying, to the government, to the federal government, we need to do something about this. These are American citizens that still don't have power. They still don't have roads. They don't have a place to go to school. They're still being bused hour or two away to try to go to public school because their local school hasn't been fixed. And there's corruption in the government, and what is the federal government going to come in and do and protect these citizens of the United States? That's where my focus is like, all of these issues, like you said, are still going on 2 years later, and nobody's caring about how it's affecting the American citizens that live in Puerto Rico, which is all of them. Again, I'm not trying to say that there are other people living in Puerto Rico that are American citizens with the Puerto Ricans. It's like, we're not doing anything for all the citizens of the United States, which are all the people living in Puerto Rico.
So there's also an opinion piece that we're referencing, which will be linked at thestateofus.org that Lance found for us. And this is again in the Wall Street Journal. And one of the things it points out, so we've talked some about, these are just the safety problems, right, facing people. Yeah. We haven't talked greatly about the political problems. There's more than just the governor's corruption itself. There's two other things that we need to look at. One, Lance, is that, believe it or not, by defaulting on its debt, Puerto Rico actually violated its own constitution.
Right.
And it did so kind of at the behest of encouragement from President Obama and former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who, were kind of nudging that, this is what we have to do. And we let the Fed come in, and have this oversight board and now we'll get everything fixed. And of course, it really hasn't, shaken out that way. Mm-hmm.
So I was shaken there.
Shaken out. Okay. It's just a weird, I guess it
hasn't solved the problem.
It hasn't solved the problem. Yeah. Let's put it that way.
Bipartisan, support for this to happen, and it still hasn't solved any of the problems.
The other thing you've got going on is one of the signature things of Mr. Rosalio, Governor Rosalio's party, is statehood. He's a member of a pro-statehood party, one of the big things that they're working on, or that they say
one of the big
they want to
issues
get done.
splitting the people who live on the island. Yes.
Right. And so in that process of wanting to become, a state, they haven't made very much progress there. They've got this bankruptcy going on. And then we turn back to the news article piece, and it ends explaining this. The tumult could also reorder Puerto Rico's political system. Mr. Dunay of FIU said, island residents have expressed disdain for both Mr. Roselio's party and the opposition party, which is the Popular Democratic Party, that could create an opening for an independent candidate. So you've got the people have disdain for the two major parties in Puerto Rico. And so maybe now you're talking about somebody who's a member of no party. They want statehood, and they don't have it yet. And they've got all these problems surrounding their debt situation and their bankruptcy. And that all of that has been going on in spite of the recent scandal that the governor now faces and the terrible weather stuff that has occurred to these people. The whole reason we're covering this, right, Lance, is because we're hoping that people understand if this was anywhere else, if this was in a U.S. state, it just wouldn't be like this. Right. These things would have been cleaned up so much sooner.
Would not have gotten to this point.
The corruption, the governor not resigning, everything with the weather related stuff, it just all would be handled so vastly different. Mm-hmm. As we saw with Katrina, I mean, when the government was slow to respond, there was, thousands of people who just flocked to the area to bring aid and support just on their own and through other nonprofits, because it's like, well, fine, if the Fed's not going to do something, then we will, Mm-hmm. And that's not really, it's not to say there aren't people doing that in Puerto Rico, because there are. And obviously we don't want to take away from what they're doing, but not nearly to the same scope or scale. So what we're going to look at in a minute, Lance, is statehood for Puerto Rico. Should it be on the table, and what do we need to do to make it happen? But before we get to that, why are we talking about this? We hinted at it a little bit. It's a problem that needs to be discussed, but what is TrueChat trying to do by bringing light to topics like this?
Well, it's our mission to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
Do you think we're doing that?
I try every day.
Okay.
To do that. Every show.
Yep.
That's my goal.
And if we're not doing that, people can email ethics@truechat.org, and they can let them know, and they'll look into it, see what the situation is. And as we mentioned before, the articles that we've been referencing, thestateofus.org, you can find all the articles there. You'll have to check in with your people, Lance, your fan base. Uh-huh. And you'll have to see if they've made use of that, if they've heard, have they realized when we're saying it that that's available.
Right.
And they can open it on their phone or on their computer.
Cause it really does make it easier to listen. It really does.
I think so.
It's a very simple website design.
Okay.
And I mean, I would think that, and Lance even has his Surface here. He's seen it.
I just try to get them to listen. But I'll have to go back and ask that question.
Well, we want to know, is the reference material helpful to people?
Right.
Cause if it's not, we don't have to put it there. We just thought that, we talk about this stuff all the time, and we've been trying to be good about promoting, written journalism, mm-hmm. as opposed to a lot of the cable news journalism. I'm using that word very loosely to describe cable news.
What goes on.
Yeah. So let us know if it's helpful at TrueChat.org.
And of course, you put those on there so people know we're not just making stuff up.
Yeah. It's also that we try to, to give you the title in the show, but we're also putting it there because it is a direct link, takes you off of our website onto those other places so you can see the original. So before we talk more about Puerto Rico's statehood, we're going to take a brief moment to hear from one of our sponsors. Well, welcome back. With a population of 3.34 million, Puerto Rico has more people than 20 states and the District of Columbia and all other U.S. territories.
New information for me.
Yeah.
I find this fascinating, mm-hmm. that it would be,
it's substantial.
Right. The population.
Well, because, I think a lot of people think of U.S. states and they're thinking tens of millions of people. But the reality is there's really not that many states that meet that clarification. In fact, when you look at the top I think it's only the top 9 states that have a population of 10 million or more.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody else below that, is in those single digit millions. And in fact, when you go to the very bottom, we have 5 states that have less than 1 million people in them. So Puerto Rico is by no means, tiny in comparison to other states. In fact, it's significantly larger than 20 states. So it definitely has the population, right? Is not a question about whether or not it has enough population to be a U.S. state per se. I think the question becomes, why, Lance, is Congress not moving forward on this? Puerto Rico wants it. U.S. citizens, generally speaking, don't have any opposition to it. So what's the deal? What's the holdup? Why can't we get this done? They're ready. The people of the United States are ready.
Are they ready, though? I don't know. I mean, they
think they're ready.
There are a lot of people in Puerto Rico. I mean, the last vote was it 60-40, 55-45? I don't think it was the last referendum in Puerto Rico. But yes, the majority would like it. There are all kinds of things, trade policies, taxes, government programming, healthcare. All of those things would have to be ironed out because as its designation of a commonwealth right now, some of those things would be different, and then probably the big stumbling block is that Betsy Ross and her crew would have to work overtime, and all the public buildings and schools in the United States would have to purchase a new flag. And that's probably the number one reason why people.
You really think?
No, I'm being outright facetious there.
Do you think that there is any sizable sentiment amongst Americans who just don't like the idea of another state? Not Puerto Rico specifically, but they just like 50.
Oh,
they don't want it to be.
Come on now. We know from local politics that you keep some older people in office and by God, we're just going to keep things the same no matter what. I don't like change. I don't want change. And I think there are a lot of people like that. There are a lot of people in life that just are scared of change, that it's going to upset the apple cart. They're not sure what it's going to do to their equilibrium. How's this going to affect me? And most of the time it's usually for the better when change happens. It's usually something that will make your life a little bit better. But I think it's part of human nature that people are against change. So to answer your question, yeah, I think there are people out there that would just say, I don't want to put another state in,
So, but states coming into the union is actually happened in more of our history than we have not added states.
Right. It's been a long period of time now.
Right. Long dry spell.
But it's not abnormal in the history of the United States at all.
I just think that would be something that we would want, right?
Well,
what's the counter here, Lance? Why
don't we want to expand the ideas of the United States and our government?
What's the counter? Why don't we want to add states?
You didn't listen? I said it's healthcare.
Okay.
It's taxes, it's education, it's military, okay. I mean, Puerto Rico would come in as a poor state. It would automatically be eligible for a lot of social programs that as a commonwealth, it's not. And so there are those people who would say, we don't want those kinds of situations to come into the United States. I'm not saying I feel that way. You're saying, what are the stumbling blocks? Puerto Rico's not producing oil.
What about representation?
It doesn't have gold fields. Because
if I'm a state right now, I'm the state of Ohio, right? Bringing another state in dilutes my power.
That's part of it.
Do you think that's a significant one?
No, I don't think it is.
Okay, because most people probably don't.
Don't even make that connection.
But I mean, in Congress, the hurdle, do you think it's that there's too many small states out there whose representatives don't want to grant Puerto Rico access because if you open this can of worms again of allowing states to join the union, of allowing new states to come in, then you've got this problem with, what if we add 10 more states? Well, then my power as Wyoming, right, the least populous state in the United States, has now been significantly reduced because we've added, at a minimum, right, with 10, we've added another 20 senators and at least another 10 and probably significantly more than that in the House of Representatives.
It's not that I've read a lot of first person history, but when states come in, the overall hasn't been individual states being upset about it. It's been Democrats and Republicans being upset about it. Because in this case, Puerto Rico would probably come in as with Democratic representation. So now you have the Republicans, and again, I'm not picking on the Republicans because if Puerto Rico were likely to have Republican representation,
it'd just be the opposite.
Then the Democrats would be upset. It's going to be even harder for us to get back the Senate, blah, blah, blah. And, it's another 3 votes in the Electoral College for, it would be 3 or 4.
What's that? In the Electoral College?
Yeah.
It would be 3.
Would it be?
Well, I don't know.
They might get 2 representatives with
5
million people. So
they probably get at least 2.
At least
so it'd be at least 4
or 5 votes in
votes.
Electoral College votes. But it would be more, I think, divided along, to answer your question, more divided along party lines than it would be individual states being upset. The only time I can ever remember that it was states was when Missouri wanted to come in. And Missouri wanted to come in, this is 1820. Missouri wanted to come in as a slave state, and that would have upset the balance of power in Congress between free states and slave states.
Right.
So the way they fixed it then was they took land away from Massachusetts and created the state of Maine. So Maine and Missouri came in at the same time, and it kept the sectional balance of power the same. There were 12 free states and 12 slave states instead of 11 of each.
Right.
So
they had to add them in.
So that is part of it. Do you understand what I'm saying? But it was basically, it wasn't the individual states that were upset. It was the slave states versus and the free states.
Right.
So, but I can see the Democrats and the Republicans arguing over this depending on how new territories would come in as states.
Okay.
I think that could be a stumbling block.
So, and this
more so than individual states.
And that I've been a proponent of,
you want to take everybody in.
Opening the discussion for, open application to statehood.
Yeah.
But
I mean, not just Puerto Rico. Right. You want to let everybody in.
Well, not everybody. No. I said I want to open application. Congress still has to vote on it.
Okay.
Not just, it's not just fill out. It's not like an auto application and you get the job.
So you're not like.
This isn't Wendy's. We're not just hiring smiling faces.
I was thinking like the credit card companies in the 80s and 90s.
Oh, okay.
Where you go to every sporting event and fill out a credit card and you automatically got it with a free gift.
Yeah, here you go.
Okay.
No.
That's not the system you want.
No.
Because that's the way I've always pictured it.
No, I mean, I do think that we have
to have this open arm to let everybody into the United States.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a difference between open arms and lying in the prone position and just letting everybody stand on us.
Okay.
I mean, because you do have to think about the financial standing of a place like Puerto Rico. I think the difference with our territories is the reality.
Come on now. I'm gonna stop you on that one.
Okay.
Because why do you? They are American citizens.
Well,
why not just say, why does it matter if they're rich or poor or if they have natural resources or whatever? Shouldn't we be protecting them as American citizens?
Because they're already a territory, yes. That's what I was getting to with the application for statehood.
All right.
I think before I would want to open it to the rest of the world, anybody who wants to apply, I would want us to first make sure that we have provided the opportunity for any of our current territories that want to be states to become states. Because the reality is those people, with the exception of American Samoa, which is a special... Man,
you stole my thunder again. I was going to bring up the nationalists in American Samoa. But actually you shared that. So that
I think they should... I think they should have that opportunity as well. Now, they would be the smallest U.S. state if they came in as a state.
Would you have a minimum population requirement?
Well, what was... you're the historian. There was one, right, where originally there was you have to have so many citizens and you have to define your geographic area and they have to vote and say that they want this and then you can apply. Doesn't mean you'll be accepted, but then you can apply to Congress for statehood. So So I don't know what that threshold is. I'm sure we would need to update it because
Well,
I
it was
don't
in
think
the thousands. I mean, it wasn't
It was
way
many,
back
though.
when, right?
Yeah.
It had to be.
Today, it's not very many. I mean, there's parts, you could take parts of Ohio and organize.
Wasn't the Northwest Territory, I think it was 10,000 people, I think is what it was, inhabitants, or was it 50,000?
Yeah. So according to the Northwest Ordinance, when the population of a territory reached 60,000, the territory could apply to become a state. So under
10,000 plus 50,000 equals 60,000.
I
was getting there.
The Northwest Ordinance, though, I don't know, without looking at the specifics of the legislation, I'm not sure if that was, was that just included for everything moving forward or just things from the Northwest Territory?
No, it
everything
was
moving
specific.
forward.
No, it was specifically for that.
Oh, okay.
For that group, for that.
Because I was going to say American Samoa then doesn't meet that requirement. I think they have a population of like 55,000. I mean, they're close.
Right.
But, I think we would want to update it anyway, because by that logic, if, the city of Columbus wanted to become a state, it could. And New York could become like 10 states. So
and I'm not sure what we did
it
with.
could become a lot more than 10.
And I'm sure there were laws, because you had the Arizona Territory and the Wyoming Territory.
Sure.
I'm sure they had to meet population, but I'm not recalling any specific numbers that I've ever read there. The Northwest Territory.
Right. 60,000, I think, is the only ever specific.
Well, I'm not sure
requirement.
about it. That's what I'm saying is Congress might have addressed it with Arizona and New Mexico and the states or the territories out west. I just know the one that we always taught was the Northwest Territory had an inhabitant number.
At least in the quick, the quick search here that I've done, I'm not seeing a reference to anything other than the Northwest Territory in regards to a population requirement. So
Mr. NHS, what is the answer to this? You're so well versed in knowledge, being a member of NHS. Is there a population requirement for a new U.S. state, or is that at the whim of Congress?
From what I remember, there is.
To go through?
There were several steps, right? That you had to, at least in my history class, we were told that there were several steps. Like you had to have so many people, so many towns, so many counties, something like that, in order to qualify.
But I mean, here's one for you guys out there in the listening audience. If you're better versed in this than I am anyway, please let us know if there's something that, let us know what it says.
So I've got, somebody's provided some additional, it sounds like it's a little fuzzy is actually as we've learned with a lot of things like American Samoa, they're American nationalists, not American citizens. The reason for that's really unknown, other than that Congress just hasn't gotten around to giving them citizenship. So, which is terrible. Obviously that's, we don't want that. But sometimes I think things like this, it's been so long since we've admitted a state where I think population was even a factor, that it's like, well, we don't really care because they've all been large enough that I guess Congress has kind of looked at it and said, that's fine. That's enough people. We have states that have that population already. So no big deal. I think it was a bigger deal, obviously, with your Northwest Ordinance when you have all this new land that you're trying to get people out to. And it's like, we don't want a group of 1,000 people to be able to form a state because that would definitely upset other states and say, you're really unfairly diluting our power by giving 2 senators to 1,000 people. That's, you're getting real generous there. And it's still pretty bad, mind you, like when you look at electoral college representation for people in California versus people in Wyoming. People in Wyoming, it's about 1 electoral college vote to 200,000 residents, where in California, it's about 1 electoral college vote to 700,000 people. So representation across the U.S. is not proportional. Right. But we've known that. I mean, that's our two body system. So you do have to be careful, I think, with this. I don't want to willy-nilly admit states because you don't want to unfairly degrade the power of, existing states without taking into account what I was getting to with the resource stuff from before, which is where we were trying to wrap things up, is when looking at areas that are not territories right now that would in other words, Mexico wants to become a state, okay. I think that's where we have to look at. Congress has to examine not just their application, but what are they bringing to the table? What does it do for the union to admit? Because that's what the Fed should be concerned with is how will this affect the well-being of the union as a whole? So
what's the recap on Puerto Rico?
The recap is that,
what do you think should happen with Puerto Rico?
They should be a state.
Okay.
I think at this point, it's that
if they hold a
simple.
referendum now, or you think based on the last referendum, they should automatically, the majority won, they can apply for statehood?
Yeah. I think,
or should there be a majority vote, or should more than 50% of the people? Because I think the last referendum vote they took in 2000 something, there were actually 3 different ways to vote.
Well, the problem was the turnout was really low. It was only like 30% voter turnout.
Okay.
So the concern was, even though there was good support, not a lot of people showed up to vote. So the question was,
so does that show that they don't care, or they just thought statehood was going to win? So
right.
I'm not in really opposition to that, so it doesn't matter.
I don't know. I mean, that's hard to say. You would think if they really disliked it, they would have showed up to vote, just like if they were really for it, they would have showed up to vote. But you could also, again, not knowing the specifics, we know from local elections that there's lots of times where people don't know what's on the ballot and the importance of it. The other thing that probably had an effect is most of them probably looked at it and said, we've been wanting to be a state, since shortly after we became a territory, and it hadn't been done, and we're going on like 80 years, And so
why
right.
continue to care?
If Congress isn't going to respect whatever this vote is, why am I going to take my time to go vote on something that apparently doesn't matter? So that could be part of it too. I think if Congress said, we're ready to give you statehood if you have a vote, and if a majority of the voting population votes in favor of this, then
Puerto Rico, it's been more than 80 years. It's been since 1901.
Yeah. It's a long time.
After the end of the Spanish-American War, the United States signed a treaty with Spain and picked up Puerto Rico. So it's been almost 120 years that has belonged to the United States.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when we gave it Commonwealth status, if that was immediate or not, but we've, quote, owned or had the rights to Puerto Rico since the Spanish.
Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory following the Spanish-American War in 1898, and its residents became U.S. citizens in 1970 or 1917. It became a U.S. Commonwealth in 1952.
Okay.
So,
I knew it had a longer history than 80 years of being a part of the United States.
It all depends, I suppose,
in some form or fashion,
where we're counting from.
Exactly. No, you're right.
It's been owned by the U.S. since 1898, but they've only been U.S. citizens,
kicking Spanish butt and taking over land that we wanted.
Yep.
Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico.
I learned the other day, I didn't know this,
took it all.
that Cuba used to be ours, and then they did their independence thing.
You're just making it really.
Yeah.
That was a question on Chapter 10 test that you took in my class.
Well,
so just
it was one question.
Either you got it right and forgot it or whatever, but
I think I forgot
your
it.
Social studies, your American history teacher taught you that.
Yeah.
Because that is a question on
we shouldn't have lost that.
Huh?
That was silly.
Okay, Fidel Castro, Cold War.
Right. I mean, could have avoided all that if we had not just been like,
Yep.
See, there are times where letting somebody become a state quickly would have avoided big issues.
Well,
like the Bay of Pigs.
If you really want to go back, and now here's one that maybe I can redeem myself a little bit.
Okay.
But back as early as the 1850s, there was a Southern plan in Congress to make Cuba a state, to expand. Because
needed to follow through.
Because there was no westward expansion for slavery.
Right.
And so the slave states saw that they were going to eventually lose ground. So let's go into Mexico. We had Cuba. Let's go Cuba, Mexico, and let's go south, make them states.
Right.
And then that
Well, they kind of got part of that done.
We
with
tie
the
into slavery.
American-Mexican War and taking,
Right.
a significant portion of Mexico.
Well, now it's 1846 to 1848, which is why in the 1850s, it's like, okay, let's continue this. Let's continue to go on further south. And Cuba there was actually a plan in place by one of the senators, and it didn't work out. But it was, very intensive. It was close to coming to a vote,
and then just kind of
some situations, not to get into it.
So Puerto Rico should be a state.
I think so. I do believe so.
You don't oppose it?
No.
Okay.
No. And I guess at this point, I'm not even against it, even if the people don't want to.
Right.
It's like you're getting U.S. aid.
Yeah.
You are allowed to travel freely between the United States and Puerto Rico. I
don't see a big downside for the Puerto Rican people.
It's like,
I just at the end of the day, the pros I think outweigh the cons. They give up a little bit of self-governance.
Sure.
But honestly, they really don't have that much right now anyway, because at the end of the day, if Congress doesn't like what they're doing with all U.S. territories, they pretty much just have the right to override what they're doing. And it's not that Congress can't do that with a state, but it is a lot more complicated for them to infringe on a state's rights. So, Caleb, Puerto Rico, a state?
Yes.
Okay. Look at our
concise.
Producer.
Well, you guys you've made a great case for it.
We've got him convinced.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Hopefully some other people think so.
But then obviously you open it up for the other ones too. But.
And let us know. We want the opposing viewpoint. I'm sure there's Puerto Ricans out there that would just prefer their independence, probably. Say, forget this U.S. thing.
Well, people like me.
Yeah.
And we don't like anybody telling us what to do. So
right.
the less government we can have, the happier we are.
Yeah. So let us know your thoughts at TrueChat.org, thestateofus.org. And Lance, what are the ways people can tune in?
Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else fine podcasts are found.
For The State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
And I'm Caleb Spinner.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change.